I was 14 years old, on my hands and knees on the kitchen linoleum, making the specific sound a person makes when their airway is closing. Not a dramatic, movie-style gasp, but something quieter and more terrifying. A thin, reedy wheeze that felt like breathing. Through a coffee stirrer while someone sat on my chest, and my mother stepped over me to get to the sink. Not around me, over me. She turned on the faucet, rinsed a bowl, and said without turning around, "Stop faking it and get in the kitchen. Dinner isn't going to make itself." I couldn't answer her because answering required air I didn't currently have, and the effort of trying made the wheeze worse. And the worse it got, the more my vision started narrowing at the edges in a way I had never experienced before, on a silvery brightening, like the world slowly reducing itself to a single point of light. What happened in the next 11 minutes changed the entire direction of my life. And what happened 20 years later, when my mother's own lungs began failing her, is the part of this story I have never told anyone until right now. If you've ever been invisible to the one person whose entire job was to see you, subscribe right now, because this story is going to take you somewhere that changes how you understand the distance between being failed and becoming free. I need to take you back before the kitchen floor, because that stepping over didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened inside a relationship that had been teaching me, since I was old enough to be taught anything, that my body's signals were not reliable narrators of my own experience. My mother was not cruel in the conventional sense. She didn't hit. She didn't scream. She was something harder to name, a woman who had decided somewhere in her own history that children who expressed physical distress were performing, and that the correct response to performance was to withdraw the audience. She called it toughening us up. She called it not raising children who ran to the doctor every 5 minutes. She called it common sense, in a tone that made clear that anyone who disagreed was lacking the common part. I had been having breathing episodes for 2 years before that floor. Small ones first, a chest tightness during gym class, a wheeze that came and went in autumn, the sensation of my lungs deciding unilaterally to process less air than my body required. I told my mother the first time. She said I was anxious. The second time, after my gym teacher pulled me aside with concern, she said I was looking for attention. The third time, in winter, when it woke me from sleep at 2 in the morning, and I stood in her doorway, genuinely frightened by the sound my own chest was making. She told me to drink water and go back to bed. By 14, I had stopped expecting help and started managing my own undiagnosed condition alone, identifying triggers, avoiding certain environments, sitting near exits, carrying cold water because it sometimes relaxed whatever was contracting enough to get through a class. I had become the primary caretaker of a medical condition nobody had named yet. Inside a body nobody responsible for it was willing to officially examine. If you've ever had to become your own doctor as a child because the adult in the room decided your symptoms were inconvenient fiction, comment I managed it alone below, because what I was doing at 14 was not resilience. It was survival dressed up as resilience, and those two things are not the same. The afternoon in October was a Wednesday, an ordinary midweek afternoon that had no right to be the setting for something permanent. I walked home from school and something in the air, a neighbor burning leaves, some combination of the season and the walk, triggered the worst episode I had ever had. Not the gradual tightening I'd learned to manage. This was immediate and total. A full closing down that dropped me to my knees before I could process what was happening. And by the time I was on that floor, I already knew this one was different. My usual strategies required functioning lung capacity I didn't currently possess. My mother was at the sink. She turned halfway when she heard me, made her assessment in approximately 1 second, which is not enough time to assess anything accurately except the assumption you already arrived, holding, and then stepped over me. Stop faking it. Get in the kitchen. 4 words that I have carried in my body every single day for 20 years, not because they were the worst thing anyone ever said to me, but because of what they revealed about how completely a person can look directly at you and choose not to see. Here is where the story turns. And here is the person who actually saved my life, because it was not a paramedic and it was not my mother. My sister Renata was 17, upstairs doing homework, and she heard my breathing from 2 floors away through a closed door because she had been listening to me with the calibrated attention of someone whose love for a person had made them into an expert. She knew the difference between my regular sounds and my emergency sounds the way you know the difference between weather and a storm. Not analytically in your body. She was down 2 flights of stairs in under 30 seconds. She didn't argue with my mother. She picked up the kitchen phone and called 911. And my mother said, "Renata, put that down," in her pronouncement voice. And Renata looked at her and said in a tone I had never heard from my 17-year-old sister before, completely adult, completely certain, with no room in it for anything except what it was saying. "She cannot breathe. I am calling." Then she gave the dispatcher our address and described what she was seeing with an accuracy that told me she had been quietly educating herself about this for a long time, because she used words the dispatcher recognized: respiratory distress, audible wheeze, decreased air, entry, that a teenager only knows if she's been afraid of something and preparing for it in private. In the 6 minutes before the paramedics arrived, Renata sat on the floor beside me with her hand on my back and talked to me in a low, steady voice about nothing important. A television show described slowly, in detail, because she understood, without being told, that panic was the enemy of what little airway I had left, and that an audio anchor was the most useful thing she could give me while we waited. When the paramedics came through the door, they had a nebulizer on me within 90 seconds. The medication began slowly, like a door being pushed open from the outside, to restore something to my chest that I had been trying to hold on to alone for 11 terrifying minutes. My mother stood at the sink the entire time, 4 feet away, dish in hand. She didn't approach, didn't ask questions. One paramedic looked at her and said, in a tone that was professionally neutral, and said, "Everything underneath that neutrality. Has she had episodes like this before?" My mother said, "She gets anxious sometimes." The paramedic looked at me, looked back at her and said, "This is not anxiety. This is asthma. She needs to be evaluated today." My mother said, "I see," in the voice she used when processing information she hadn't expected and wasn't ready to acknowledge had implications. I was taken to the hospital. Renata came with me. My mother arrived 2 hours later after I was told, finishing dinner and leaving it covered on the stove so it wouldn't dry out. The doctor who examined me was a woman named Dr. Chen, who had apparently decided exactly how directly to speak to my mother, because Renata, sitting close enough to the hallway to hear, told me afterward that Dr. Chen said the delay in calling emergency services had constituted serious risk, and that my condition had likely been present and manageable for approximately 2 years, and that she was recommending a follow-up with the hospital's patient advocacy team. I was diagnosed with moderate to severe asthma. I was given a rescue inhaler that night, small and blue, that I read the accompanying literature about before I fell asleep. I kept that first empty inhaler in a box in my room for years afterward, because it represented something I couldn't name at 14 and can name clearly now. The first time someone with the authority to define what was happening in my body used that authority to tell the truth about it. And the truth was exactly what I had been saying for 2 years, while the person whose job it was to listen had called it a performance. The years after were complicated. My mother managed my asthma practically from that point forward without ever once acknowledging the 2 years before it, or the stepping over, or the dish she finished before coming to the hospital. She folded those things into the category of things that did not require discussion, where she kept most of the difficult true things in our family, and life continued at its surface level with the managed efficiency she applied to everything. I left at 18, built a life that looked nothing like the one I'd been handed as a template. I studied health sciences, became a respiratory therapist, and which surprised some people and surprised me not at all, because I had been studying my own breathing since 12 years old out of pure survival necessity. Renata and I stayed close, closer than before, because the kitchen floor had told both of us something true about who we were to each other that needed no subsequent conversation to confirm. She was my person. She still is. Then 2 years ago, my mother was diagnosed with a chronic pulmonary condition. her lungs failing slowly, progressively, shortness of breath on exertion, then at rest. Then during the ordinary negotiations of an ordinary day, her doctor called me because she had listed me as her emergency. Contact without asking, which was itself a sentence in her particular language. I sat in the hospital parking garage for 20 minutes before going inside, doing something I hadn't expected to need to do, consciously deciding what kind of person I was going to be, not what obligation required, what I chose. Her pulmonologist walked me through her condition with clinical precision I was professionally equipped to receive. When he finished, the first thing I asked was about her rescue medication protocol. The second was about trigger management. The third was about early warning signs before an episode escalated. He looked at me with the expression of someone recalibrating their assessment and said, "You're in respiratory. Then you know what this looks like, managed versus unmanaged." I said I did. I sat with that sentence in the specific private way you sit with sentences that are technically about one thing and actually about everything. My mother was smaller in the hospital bed than in my memory, which is what illness does, and it brings the vulnerability that was always present to the surface where it can no longer be managed into invisibility. She looked at me when I came through the door with an expression I had seen exactly once before, the expression she'd had when the paramedic said this is not anxiety, and her assessment collapsed in a single sentence, the expression of a woman confronting the limits of her own certainty. I sat beside her bed, asked how she was feeling. She said she was fine, in the tone she used for things she was not fine about. And then she did something she had done in my entire memory fewer times than I could count on one hand, and she stopped, managing the sentence, and said, the real one underneath it, "I'm frightened. It's frightening not to be able to breathe." And I looked at her, this woman who had stepped over me on a kitchen floor, and said, I know exactly what that's like. And the way I said it, not with anger, not with the weight of 20 unsaid years, just with the plain direct truth of someone who had the specific lived knowledge of exactly what she was describing, landed on her face and made her look at me for a long moment without her usual surface in place. She said quietly, "I know you do." 3 words. Doing something entirely different from "we need you." Not a request for function. Just an acknowledgement, quiet, late, and insufficient in volume relative to what it was trying to cover, but real. I set up her care management, organized her medication schedule, corrected her inhaler technique with the professional patience I brought to every patient, without commentary on the particular irony of who was teaching whom. She told me eventually, not in one conversation but in pieces, the way people approach difficult truths when the window they have left starts to feel finite, that she had probably known something was wrong with my breathing before the kitchen floor, that she had found it easier to doubt my reports than to confront what it would mean to have missed something real. She said, "I should have looked at you more carefully. I should have looked," and I let that sentence sit in the room without softening it or telling her it was okay, because it wasn't okay and she knew it. And the most honest thing I could give her was the space to know it fully, without me rushing in to make it easier to carry. Renata was there that day, sitting by the window the way she'd sat on the kitchen floor at 17, close, present, doing nothing except being there with her full attention. After our mother said what she said, Renata reached over and put her hand on her arm. Not as forgiveness, not as erasure, just as the acknowledgement of a person who had finally said a costly true thing and deserved to have it witnessed. My mother covered Renata's hand with her own, and the 3 of us sat in that room, with 20 years of unsaid things finally having been said, and the silence that followed was different from every silence we'd ever shared. Not managed, not smooth, not maintained at a safe altitude. Just quiet, just real, just ours. I still have the first inhaler, the small blue one from that October Wednesday. It sits in a box next to a photograph of Renata and me taken the summer I graduated from my respiratory therapy program, both of us squinting into the sun with the disoriented happiness of people who have arrived somewhere they weren't certain they would reach. I keep it because it is the most honest object I own in the physical record of the first moment someone with the authority to name what was real used it to name it correctly. Every patient I sit with Every frightened face I look at, directly and carefully, and for long enough to actually see what is there, and every one of them is the answer to the question I was asking from a kitchen floor at 14. What does it look like when the person with the authority to see you actually uses it? I know what it looks like. I try every day to make sure the people in my care know it too. If this story hit something real in you, if you've ever been on a floor no one came to, or been the Renata who came when no one else would, tell me in the comments. Which moment landed hardest? The stepping over, the small blue inhaler, or what my mother finally said in that hospital room? I read every single one. Subscribe now for more raw, real stories about the people who survived the ones who were supposed to protect them. Hit that notification bell so you never miss the next story, and stay close. Because what's coming next is even more powerful than this, and you do not want to miss a word of it.